Hello everyone, Santia here, and today I want to talk about AI, art, and the economy, because these are all kind of interwoven. This is something that I started trying to tweet about a little bit, but it turns out it's very difficult to tweet about because of Twitter's format. Um, Twitter is bad for organizing large, nuanced thoughts about things because of the bite-sized structure. There are certainly some ideas that it works well to convey in threads, where things kind of build on each other or otherwise link together in a very neat and orderly fashion. But I don't feel like my thoughts on this are quite that way. It's too much of a graph, too much of a web of things. So what I'm talking about is AI art, and when I say AI art, I'm not just referring to like generating images or video, but also AI music and AI storytelling, where an AI has been trained on a data set. This is really important, right? AI is trained on a data set. It doesn't just spontaneously come up with things out of nowhere. It's trained on a data set, and then it uses that to kind of propagate stuff out. I'm not the biggest expert on the technology of it, but this is not data from Star Trek. And this is why I want to create a really important distinction right off the bat between what I consider a digital intelligence. A digital intelligence is something like data from Star Trek or C3PO or R2D2 from Star Wars, right? It's that kind of thing where they are an intelligence, they're an actual intelligence, but they are digitally contained, as it were. They are made of a digital thing rather than the biological brains that we have, where like a biological intelligence as opposed to a digital intelligence. An artificial intelligence is something that appears to be intelligent but is not. This is a really important distinction. So like in video games, artificial intelligence is a series of decisions that programmers have already designed ahead of time. And so it's a series of checks for various conditions in random number generation. That's really what AI is in a video game, because that's kind of the extent of what you can do. You can be reading various properties about the game state and interpreting those and doing stuff, as opposed to a digital intelligence, which would be some sort of thing that has its own creativity and thoughts and ideas and things like that. I think that artificial intelligence can reach and crest past a certain point where it becomes a digital intelligence, but we are, as far as I'm aware, a good bit away from that particular barrier of true aliveness in the intellectual mind in the intelligence space. So artificial intelligence is just running some sort of algorithm. There's some sort of factors that go into it, choosing to do things a specific way. But that decision-making process, even if it's kind of a black box to us, doesn't quite reach the level of full intelligence. It is, there's a gray area between the two, for sure, and that makes things a little bit difficult. But in my mind right now, the AI systems that we have, even for creativity, are still very much so in the artificial intelligence space, not the digital intelligence space. So this is where we get into some of the complicating factors. So AI in general is coming for a lot of job space, I think. Automation in these systems, I do think that as these things develop, as AI systems develop, but also as robotics develop, automated systems in general, such as like kiosks for like self-checkout and things like that, are going to continue to sort of displace jobs. And AI art is in a particular area where we're seeing a lot of discussion about that online right now. The biggest problem in my mind with AI art is the economic angle of it. So what I mean by this is artists, if they're going to make a living off of making art, need to be able to have a market to sell their art into. AI art undercuts into that market. And this is where we run into the problems that develop. This is something that I think is just another pressure point, I guess we'll say, in a building economic issue that we have, where technology is multiplying our ability to create stuff at such a rate that we are struggling to keep up with it. And we're struggling. Excuse me, I need some water. We're struggling to keep up with it, specifically because our economic paradigm doesn't keep up with it very well. The economy is the way that I'm going to define it is the system in which we manage resources. It is our resource distribution mechanism. So we have things like food, water, and electricity for like raw resources, but we also have composite resources. So, for example, this pen. It's a nice 6-color pen. It's fun little thing. This is made up of various resources. It's made up of the plastics that compose the body and the housing. There's some metal in there for spring mechanisms to push down each individual thing and hold it in place and things like that. There's the ink that is used. This is an elaborate expression of resources. And how are we going to decide how these resources are distributed? That's the economic system that we are working under. So we have a form of capitalism that is basically saying within certain, whatever the government says is not illegal, and whatever payment processors say you're allowed to do, that's a whole nother can of worms. I will set aside my feelings on that for right now as best I can. But whatever is a permitted form of monetary exchange, that is the sort of legal market. There's black markets, of course, that also exist. A complex interweave there of government policies creating space for black markets to some extent and other things. But the point is, we are deciding who gets what resources based upon this particular economic model. The things that have developed over time that are highly relevant to this is we live in an extremely specialized age. So what sort of skills you have that you can exchange on the marketplace is an extremely specialized thing. What I mean by this is it's not just generalized labor for the most part. People get into very specific work. Like in the developed world, you don't have subsistence farmers. That's not a thing. That's not a fallback. And this is really important. It isn't like because like in the past, you had a huge percentage of your population that was farming. Farming is now a highly specialized, highly technical job. So people can't just farm their own food anymore. So what do we do in order to be able to get access to things like food and shelter and water when we cannot do those ourselves anymore? When the creation of housing is highly specialized, when we have to worry about being able to pay property taxes on our land and housing and all of that sort of stuff, when we have to worry about being able to get water and food. Like to some extent, this is a problem created by law, by regulation that says, your housing has to meet these codes and you have to get these permits in order to be able to drill wells that I'm assuming you have to get permits for that. And are you able to get land that is arable that hasn't already been occupied and that sort of stuff in order to be able to grow your own food? How are you getting the seed? What's all of the sort of legal things that are on top of food, seed, and all that sort of stuff, crop seed and all that? It becomes complicated. Anyway, the point is you can't just exist on your own without being connected to the whole of society. You can't just buy a plot of land, cut down all the trees, build a house out of it, dig a well, and grow crops and subsist that way, because there's too many other things in society that are requiring you to engage with it at some level. You have to interact with a greater economy in order to be able to get money to pay property taxes, if nothing else. And as a slight aside, I have huge issues with taxing ownership because that doesn't directly generate you money. Any money that you get in, that would be income that should be taxed, in my opinion. But there's all sorts of other issues with people trying to get around that, and we're not going to get into that now. So we have a system where people have to find some way of making money in order to be able to survive. This creates a desperation state where if you're not able to get that, you fall into desperation, which makes you easily exploitable. But we also have a market economy where things are made for consumerist purposes. In general, I think we'd be better off if we lowered the amount of consumption that we did, and if we spent less time making junk we don't need in order to sell it to each other to justify people being able to be allowed to live, because it's super wasteful to just make a bunch of stuff that we're throwing away. But that's kind of beside the point at the moment as well. So we have a bunch of people who are in creative fields who their way of eating is selling off the art that they make. Whether they're selling music or selling illustrations, or selling photography, like photographs that have been taken of them. So they're selling their posing skills, their appearance, as it were, or their skills of taking photography. There's a bunch of interconnected skills that go on here. But the selling of that is how they make an income in order to be able to live. So art is not being made for artistic expression within a certain range, right? There's the professional artists who are not making art for artistic expression. They're making art for consumptive purposes. They're making art to be able to sell it to other people. And then people are buying art not because of the artistic expression, but because of some other factors that they like. I don't fault people for either end of this, by the way. I think that there is a better economic model that could exist in theory, but we always run into human nature, don't we? So the issue then with AI art is that it is depressing the value of art in the markets, theoretically anyway. At least this is the concern I think that people have of where it's going, which then directly impacts the livelihood of artists and impacts their ability to eat and have places to live and have water to drink and afford the supplies and materials required to be able to make art in the first place. This is a big problem, but I think it is primarily an economic problem. In other words, I think the problem with AI-generated creativity, as it were, is the problem of the way our economy is arranged. And I think one of the things that we have as a big problem with the way our economy is arranged is we have a lot of people doing pointless work in order to be able to eat, because that's how everything's been arranged. I think there's huge problems with our current economic arrangement, and I would like to see something a bit different. It's difficult to figure out what exact solutions could be. I do like Star Trek World, and in fact, just earlier today, my sister was showing me a really good, I think it was a Twitter thread. She had taken pictures of it, but talking about the replicator is not what made Star Trek World work. Star Trek, the mindset of the people, where we distribute resources so that way people can at least survive, that enabled the replicator to work, because otherwise you run into it all goes back to the incentive systems, right? What keeps you in business? That is where your incentives are. What keeps you getting an income? That's where your incentives are. So you have drug companies. They want to make as much profit as they can. How do they do that? Well, they invent treatments instead of cures. I mean, hopefully they are looking for cures, but you also just try to get treatments to people that are desperate for those treatments at as high of a price as you can, and you don't care about who falls through the cracks. You're not worried about providing health care. You're not worried about making people's lives better. You're worried about making profit. And this is where you get things like insulin being ridiculously expensive, which is not what the people who found insulin wanted in the first place, but I digress. There's going to be a lot of digressing here. And so because our economic system is arranged this way, where the incentives are like the natural direction, the entropy of capitalism is monopoly. Competition is the immune system that keeps capitalism healthy. You're welcome to debate whether or not capitalism can be healthy or not. I think capitalism is a useful tool and a wicked and tyrannical god. And I think in the United States of America, it has too much fallen towards being a wicked and tyrannical god. I can't necessarily speak to other countries. I think other countries do a bit better job of this. But what ends up happening is there's a lot of forces then that basically systems are always going to benefit some people and hurt others. And those who are benefited usually end up being the wealthy and powerful because the system is benefiting them. And so dismantling that system is to their detriment. And so they use their wealth and power to try to maintain the status quo. They try to maintain the system. And that leads to, like, it makes it hard to change systems, to adjust how we're doing things. This is the thing that's really constantly frustrating to me. Society is the product of collective imagination. It is an artificial construct that exists entirely in an imaginary place. It results in actions and words and deeds and ways of doing things because people act in accordance to that imaginary system. And when I say imaginary and artificial, I don't mean not real, but I mean it is something that exists entirely in our heads, hence imaginary, and it has no actual concrete existence. Hence artificial. It's something that we've made up. It's not a natural law. It's not like gravity. Gravity is a rule of the universe, and so far we have not found ways of defying it. Not really. We found ways of applying other physical laws to get around it, as it were, through things like lift and stuff like that, but that's other forces working against gravity, not canceling out gravity, right? It's a different sort of thing. It's not anti-gravity that lets us reverse the push of gravity or something like that, or the pull of gravity. Gravity doesn't push, it pulls. But you know what I mean. Turn gravity into a push instead of a pull. But anyway, so society is extremely malleable. We can have the rules of society, the mores. I don't know. I can never pronounce this word correctly. It looks like mores, but I think it's mores, like eagles. But we can have those be whatever we want, but we have to agree. And so it is both simple to change and hard to change because it requires persuading people to do things differently. And hopefully I'm not. You can see why this is hard to turn into a Twitter thread, because there's just so many, like, okay, how's the economy functioning? What sort of incentives is it creating? As my pastor is fond of saying, we want what we want is like when we want it at the least cost to ourselves. And I think that's a huge issue that's also going on here when it comes to AI art. Is it gives people what they want and it lets people get it more cheaply and more quickly than waiting on an artist to produce some sort of work. And that's... We'll see where things go. I think AI content generation can be really useful, but it will impact jobs. If it is permitted to exist, it will decrease... Like, here's the thing. There's the layer of people who will use it who wouldn't be able to afford to commission an artist in the first place, or composer or whatever. I'm using artist in a very broad sense here. There's going to be people who won't use it because they want results that are much more bespoke, and they can afford to commission someone to make what they want. And then there's going to be kind of that middle ground area where somebody's like, I mean, there's going to be people who both commission and use AI art content generation. There's going to be people who might have commissioned but are happy with AI art generation. So you're going to end up with that sort of band in the middle as well. I think it could be a really useful tool for making a bunch of, like, in an ideal world, AI and automation let people not do jobs that people don't want to do because, like, people don't want to do them. And the AI and automative systems can take over those jobs. That would free people up to be able to spend time on doing things that they want to do, to spend more time on hobbies, to spend more time on leisure pursuits, to spend more time developing relationships and friendships and growing community. But as always, the promise of our technology has always been the opportunity for more leisure time. The powerful and wealthy have seen it as an opportunity to line their own pockets. And guess who's in charge? And thus we end up with the situation that we're in. And that's where AI art threatens the livelihood of artists, and that's where it becomes a problem. And I don't think AI art would be considered a problem or dangerous or anything else if it didn't threaten the livelihood of artists. But it does, because that's the economic system that we have. And that's kind of, I think, the summary of kind of my thoughts. AI art as an end of itself is a consumption end. And that end exists because of the way our economy works. If artists were free to make things for personal expression because they want to, or whatever other sort of personal motivations they might have, maybe they want to take commissions, I don't care. Maybe they want to do things for a community, whatever. That'd be great. The fact that so there's so much of a market for art that is consumption based. If artists did not have to make art in order to be able to eat, if they had enough money, because we've decided that people don't need to have to work to survive, like if we had that sort of society where people no longer had to work to survive, which is the sort of society I want, to be clear, then I think that would dramatically decrease the perceived negative impact of AI art and content creation. So there's definitely a lot of discussions that need to be had. I think our current economic model needs to change. I think it fundamentally needs to change. I think that a form of capitalism could still exist, but I think it can be a tool and a subset of our greater economic framework. The key here is right now we have a society in which people serve the economy, and it needs to be the other way around. The economy needs to serve people. And if the economy is not supplying people's needs, then it needs to be changed in order to make sure people's needs are being met. And then there's a certain threshold of thriving that I want to see exist on top of that. I'm not quite sure what the right balance of things is, but right now it ain't it. We don't have the right balance. It is too much skewed in the side of people not surviving. And we have the resources in order to be able to address that. We do not have the distribution to be able to address that. And because the economy is about resource distribution, that's where it's fundamentally broken. So this video has been all over the place. Hopefully you found something interesting about it. And hopefully there can maybe be some good conversation in the comments below. We'll see. But I think that's all that I want to say on it for right now. So until next time, everyone, thank you for listening. Take care and goodbye.